Thanks for tuning in to the Urban Scope podcast. I'm back with another hip hop discussion. And of course, recently in hip hop news or hip hop circles, there's been discussion about classic albums and who has one and who doesn't. So, one of the biggest names that I've seen that most people said don't have a classic rap album is none other than Ludacris. Now, Ludacris is one of the more interesting artists because he has that clear cut clarity sound. He has the vocabulary similar to what a Ti has or maybe a Nas, but he also has the animation of like a Buster Rhymes or Eminem. And he also had those creative videos like a Eminem or a Buster Rhymes. So he's a lot like Buster Rhymes and Eminem, but of course he doesn't have the fan base of an Eminem or maybe the credibility of a Busta Rhymes because, he went left and went to do acting and kind of stepped back from hip hop because he hasn't put out an album in 11 years. So he's been pretty inactive on the hip hop side while these other artists been pretty much in hip hop relevancy for the over, 20 decades. I mean, 2 sorry, 2 decades or more consistently, dropping projects here or there. But when it comes to classic albums as far as Ludacris is concerned, because we know about the hits, he has countless hits that cross over, hits that, made it to the Now That's Music, and he made albums, songs that still play today, like What's Your Fantasy, which is a huge crossover hit, uh, uh, area codes, hits like that he has. But in my opinion, he does have a classic album, and arguably he probably has two. But I think Word of Mouth is a classic album for me. Now, of course, I was in high school when Word of Mouth came out in '03. I want to say I was in 10th grade, ninth grade, around that time. So, of course, the music hits when you remember it hit. And of course, like my early stages of listening to rap and what that album did as far as not just being a straight gangster album, because growing up in Memphis, listened to a lot of 3 6 and Yo Gotti and things like that, but Ludacris presented a different side of the music. So and he made you wanna be from Atlanta or, embrace their culture. He was the start of that whole Atlanta culture thing, especially for urban communities, uh, being a mecca for hip hop. He was the beginning stages of that, and his movement helped transcend that, whether they want to credit to him or not. But his creativity and his lyricism definitely took that to the next level. So Word of Mouth is one of the ones that had few skips on it, even with the skits, which skits are not influenced a lot nowadays. But Ludacris was one of the best artists to ever do skits, next to probably Eminem or DMX or one of those guys. But as far as that Word of Mouth album goes, we know what Roll Out, Stay Out My Business, what that did, Go to Sleep, Area Codes with Nate Dogg's, any rap songs with Nate Dogg has been classics, and he probably one of the best feature classic rap artists or slash R&B artists we've ever seen. Move, Get Out the Way, what that did, that's still one of those crossover classic hits that plays in sports worlds and everywhere. The Freaky Thing song with Faison Love, which was part of a skit as well. So it had a lot of great songs, a lot of great B-sides. So I think that's a classic album because it's not just about the hits that you have, which he had hits on that album, but the B-sides were great as well. So he really didn't miss much. And that's why I think that Word of Mouth album from 2003 is a classic project from Ludacris because it's definitely one of that time period that you couldn't tell the story without in Ludacris's discography, but in hip hop as well. So most people don't understand the importance of a Ludacris because, like I talked about before, he was a South artist when the South was just starting to get in their footing, when New York was still hot. Before he was hot, when New York was still hot. So if he was in this era with that type of music, he would have been even a much larger artist. But he still did what he did in his time, and it still should be respected because sales is just not the only barometer, which he went platinum on several different albums, but his impact of the culture and his impact in Atlanta and the South alike, and what it was sort of the spark plug, because we know that Outkast is um, Speaker Box The Love Below was the tale of that year, but he was definitely in discussion as far as the top rap albums or the top albums of that year, especially in that era. Because when you go back to the era, you have Jay, Eminem, Nas, Ludacris, and then whoever you want to add to that mix. But they were the most, and Outkast, of course, were the most influential during that time. And Ludacris was in that mix for probably from 99, 2000, all the way to '07, '08. His time period and before he started dabbling into movies and doing different things. But in his era, he was selling and had just as much impact as any of those guys. Uh, I forgot to add Nelly in there, the impact he had for the Midwest and for St. Louis and putting them on the map, sparking people like Chingy and even artists like Sexy Red today, even the SZA in some aspects. But you definitely couldn't tell the story of hip hop without Ludacris, without his story from that 2000 to 2008 period. He was a large part of what it had to be. But that albums that he used to make, he put quality projects together. And the Fast and the Furious series just helped him cross over. But when you think about the features that he had as well with What's Your Fantasy, I mean not What's Your Fantasy, but Usher's Yeah, which was on that Confessions album, one of the best R&B albums of all time, and his role on that Usher's Yeah song, his role on that Lil Jon and the East Side Boys Lovers and Friends song, most people say arguably he has the best verse on that. And he just became a household name off of all of those, you know, projects that he did. But I think his albums are underrated, and he's one of those ones that you won't appreciate until after the dust has settled. But word of mouth and what it did is just unfathomable. But I think Chicken and Beer was a great one as well. And I misquoted. Word of mouth was '01, so I was definitely in middle school at that time. But Chicken and Beer was another one of those classics that he had. That I think that just the title itself is one of those. So when you, so I think a classic album too has to have another element that it needs to have is an iconic album cover or iconic title. So it's not the sole element that you need, but it definitely factors in, I believe. And Ludacris was one of those creative guys that you knew he was gonna go to the movies because of what his videos looked like and what his projects and the albums sounded like. He could put together an album that sounded like a movie, and his albums were an experience, and it wasn't just a collective of music that he just threw together. It was a collective piece. He had the appeal of concept. When you talk about concept albums, he definitely had those. He probably was the best conceptual artist in hip hop that we've ever seen. So him not having a classic project, I think is just biased upon like being from the East Coast or being from the West Coast, because you have to think about the impact of not just the artist in that year, but the totality of what it means for the region that it was a part of. Because I can't talk about the impact of E40 because I don't understand the music. I'm not from of that culture. Or for example, I can't talk about what the hypey movement did for the West Coast, or what drill music did for Chicago and Detroit and places alike, because I'm not of that culture. Even NBA YoungBoy, I had to ask a fan about what's his favorite project, and he said all of them because they were impactful for him for all of those projects. So it's regional bias as well, but at the same time, impact is impact, and what it had for a movement, especially with the South starting to take over things around that time when Ludacris was just being at the helm of it. But he was definitely one of the catalysts for the movements. So tell me, what are your thoughts about Ludacris having a classic album or not? And until next time, I'll see you next time.